In July 1982, a man walking through the remote Sheep's Flat area near South Lake Tahoe made a discovery that would haunt investigators for nearly 4 decades. Partially buried in shallow earth, surrounded by dense forest and steep terrain, were human remains. The body was severely decomposed. No identification was found. No missing person report matched the physical description. The woman, estimated to be between 25 and 40 years old, had been dead for months, possibly longer. On this channel, the focus is on cases where science, specifically DNA and genetic genealogy, does what time could not: restore identity and uncover the truth. She became known as Sheep's Flat Jane Doe. For 37 years, her name remained unknown. Her family did not know where she was. Investigators did not know who she was. And the person responsible for her death remained free. The Sheep's Flat area sits in El Dorado County, California, east of Sacramento and just south of Lake Tahoe. The region is known for its elevation, dense pine forests, and seasonal tourism. In the summer of 1982, it was also a place where someone had tried to hide a body. The remains were found on July 17, 1982, near a dirt road. The location was isolated. Visibility from the main highway was minimal. Investigators believed the body had been placed there deliberately, in an area where discovery would be delayed or unlikely. An autopsy was conducted. The cause of death was determined to be strangulation. Ligature marks were visible on the neck. The manner of death was classified as homicide. But without identification, the investigation stalled almost immediately. Physical evidence was limited. Dental records were taken and entered into national databases. A facial reconstruction was created and distributed. Age, height, and weight were estimated. But no missing person matched. No family came forward. The case went cold. In 1982, forensic technology was rudimentary by modern standards. DNA profiling had not yet been developed for criminal casework. The first use of DNA in a criminal investigation would not occur until 1986 in the United Kingdom. Fingerprint databases were regional, not national. Missing persons reports were not centralized. Communication between jurisdictions was slow. Investigators relied on physical description, dental records, and witness reports. If no one reported a person missing, or if that report was filed in a different state, there was no system to connect the cases. Jane Doe remained unidentified, not because investigators lacked effort, but because the tools required to identify her did not yet exist. Everything discussed here is drawn from law enforcement releases, court records, and confirmed genetic genealogy findings. The case file remained open. It was reviewed periodically. But without new evidence or advances in technology, there was little investigators could do. Sheep's Flat Jane Doe was buried in a local cemetery under a marker that read simply, "Unknown." Throughout the 1990s and early 2000s, forensic science advanced rapidly. DNA profiling became standard. The Combined DNA Index System, or CODIS, was established in 1998, creating a national database for criminal DNA profiles. Cold cases began to be revisited. Evidence that had sat in storage for decades was retested using new methods. In the mid-2000s, El Dorado County investigators exhumed the remains of Sheep's Flat Jane Doe. DNA was extracted and a profile was developed. It was entered into CODIS. There was no match. The profile was also entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, known as NAMOS, which launched in 2009. Still, no identification was made. The DNA profile was valuable, but it required a comparison sample to be useful. Without a family member submitting DNA or without a match in the criminal database, the profile alone could not reveal her identity. In the mid-2010s, a new investigative method began to emerge. It was called forensic genetic genealogy. The technique used DNA profiles uploaded to public genealogy databases, platforms where people voluntarily shared their genetic information to learn about ancestry and find relatives. The most commonly used database for this purpose was GEDmatch. Unlike commercial testing services, GEDmatch allowed users to upload raw DNA data from any testing company. It also allowed law enforcement to upload DNA profiles from unidentified remains or crime scenes, with the goal of finding genetic relatives. The process worked like this. Investigators would upload a DNA profile to GEDmatch. The database would return a list of genetic matches, people who shared segments of DNA with the unknown person. Genealogists would then build family trees using those matches, working backward through generations to identify common ancestors. From there, they would work forward, identifying descendants until they narrowed the pool of possible identities. The method required patience, expertise, and access to public records. It also required that someone, somewhere in the victim's extended family, had uploaded their DNA to a public database. In 2019, investigators in El Dorado County decided to apply genetic genealogy to the Sheep's Flat Jane Doe case. They partnered with a forensic genealogy team and uploaded the DNA profile to GEDmatch. The database returned several matches. None were close relatives, no parents, siblings, or children. But there were second and third cousins. That was enough. Genealogists began constructing family trees. They used census records, birth and death certificates, marriage records, and obituaries. They identified common ancestors and traced lines of descent. Over weeks, they narrowed the list of possible identities. One name emerged: Mary Silvani. Mary Silvani had been born in 1948 in Pennsylvania. She had lived in various locations throughout her life, including California. In the early 1980s, she had been in her early 30s. She had not been reported missing in any official capacity. Her family had lost contact with her. Investigators reached out to potential family members. DNA samples were collected. Comparisons were made. The match was confirmed. In August 2019, the El Dorado County Sheriff's Office announced that Sheep's Flat Jane Doe had been identified as Mary Silvani. She had been 34 years old at the time of her death. She had a family. She had a history. And for 37 years, no one had known where she was. This case is just one of many where unidentified DNA is still being quietly worked on. Across the United States, investigators and genealogists are continuing to search family trees for answers that haven't surfaced yet. Mary Silvani was no longer Jane Doe. Her remains were returned to her family. A proper burial was arranged. The marker that had read unknown was replaced with her name. After decades of silence, DNA finally gave this case a name and an answer. If you follow stories where science brings resolution to cold cases, you'll find more of them documented here. But identification was only part of the resolution. Investigators still needed to determine who had killed her. With Mary's identity confirmed, investigators turned their attention to her life in the months and years before her death. They interviewed family members. They reviewed old records. They traced her movements and relationships. One name appeared repeatedly: William Lloyd Harbour. Harbour had been romantically involved with Mary Silvani in the early 1980s. He had lived in the same region where her body was found. He had a criminal history that included violence, and he had died in 1995, more than 2 decades before Mary was identified. Investigators located biological samples from Harbour that had been preserved in connection with previous legal matters. They extracted DNA and compared it to evidence collected from Mary's body in 1982. The DNA matched. In February 2020, the El Dorado County Sheriff's Office announced that William Lloyd Harbour had been identified as Mary Silvani's killer. He had strangled her and buried her body in Sheep's Flat. He had never been charged. He had never been questioned, and he had died without ever being held accountable. GEDmatch had been created in 2010 by 2 genealogy enthusiasts who wanted to allow people to compare DNA results across different testing companies. It was not designed for law enforcement use. But in 2018, after investigators used the platform to identify the Golden State Killer, its potential as a forensic tool became widely recognized. The platform's terms of service were updated to explicitly allow law enforcement uploads for violent crimes and unidentified remains. By 2019, it had become one of the most important resources in forensic genetic genealogy. Mary Silvani's case was one of many solved using the platform, but it was notable because it demonstrated the method's ability to identify both victims and perpetrators using the same DNA databases. For Mary's family, the identification brought a mixture of grief and relief. They had not known what had happened to her. They had not known where she was. For decades, they had lived with uncertainty. The identification did not undo the loss, but it provided answers. For investigators, the case represented a validation of forensic genetic genealogy as a legitimate and effective tool. It also underscored the importance of preserving evidence. The DNA samples collected in 1982 and again in the mid-2000s had been stored carefully. Without that preservation, the identification would not have been possible. For the broader field of forensic science, the case added to a growing body of work, demonstrating that even decades-old cases could be solved with the right combination of technology, expertise, and persistence. As of 2025, forensic genetic genealogy has been used to solve hundreds of cases. The method has identified murder victims, sexual assault perpetrators, and unidentified remains. It has brought closure to families who had waited decades for answers. The process is not fast. Building a family tree from distant genetic matches can take weeks or months. It requires access to genealogical records, many of which are incomplete or difficult to locate. It requires skilled genealogists who understand how to interpret DNA matches and navigate complex family structures. And it requires that someone, somewhere in the victim's or suspect's extended family, has chosen to upload their DNA to a public database. This reliance on voluntary participation has raised ethical and privacy questions. Some argue that people who upload their DNA to genealogy sites do not expect it to be used in criminal investigations. Others argue that the public benefit, solving violent crimes, identifying victims, justifies the use. GEDmatch has attempted to balance these concerns by allowing users to opt in or opt out of law enforcement matching. As of 2019, users must explicitly consent to allow their DNA to be used in criminal investigations. Those who do not consent are excluded from law enforcement searches. Forensic genetic genealogy is not a universal solution. It works best when the DNA profile is high quality and when there are sufficient genetic matches in the database. If a person's family has not participated in consumer DNA testing, or if their ancestry is underrepresented in the database, the method may not work. The method also requires significant resources. Genealogists must be trained. Records must be accessed. Investigative leads must be followed up. For small or underfunded law enforcement agencies, the cost and time required can be prohibitive, and the method does not work in every case. Some DNA profiles are too degraded. Some family trees are too complex or too poorly documented. Some cases lack the necessary genetic matches. Mary Silvani's case succeeded because the DNA was preserved, because distant relatives had uploaded their data to GEDmatch, and because skilled genealogists were able to construct accurate family trees. Not every case has those advantages. As of 2025, there are thousands of unidentified human remains in the United States. Some have been unidentified for decades. Many are entered into NAMUS. Many have DNA profiles. But identification remains elusive. Forensic genetic genealogy has become one of the most promising tools for resolving these cases. But it is not the only tool. Advances in forensic anthropology, odontology, and facial reconstruction continue to play important roles. So do traditional investigative methods, interviews, record searches, and community outreach. Mary Silvani's identification was part of a larger wave of resolutions that began in 2018 and continues today. Each case represents not just a name restored, but a family given answers, a community given closure, and a system that refused to forget. This case follows a pattern seen in several others, where a single DNA upload eventually led to identification, sometimes decades later. Mary Silvani was killed in the early 1980s. Her body was found in 1982. She was identified in 2019. The man who killed her was identified in 2020, 25 years after his death. The timeline is a reminder that justice and resolution do not always arrive quickly. Sometimes they arrive decades late. Sometimes they arrive after the people directly responsible have already died. But they still matter. The identification of Mary Silvani did not bring her back. It did not punish her killer in any legal sense. But it gave her family clarity. It gave her a name. And it demonstrated that even when a case seems unsolvable, advances in science and the persistence of investigators can eventually reveal the truth. The tools used in 2019 did not exist in 1982. The databases did not exist. The methods did not exist. But investigators preserved the evidence. They revisited the case. And when the tools became available, they used them. Mary Silvani's story is not unique. Across the United States, there are other cases like hers. Cases where remains were found decades ago and remain unidentified. Cases where evidence has been preserved but not yet analyzed with modern methods. Cases where a single genetic match could provide the answer. Forensic genetic genealogy is still a relatively new field. It is evolving. New databases are being developed. New methods are being refined. And more cases are being solved. The resolution of Mary Silvani's case required decades of waiting, advances in science, and the willingness of distant relatives to share their genetic information. It required investigators who refused to let the case be forgotten. And it required genealogists who understood how to turn genetic data into actionable leads. The case serves as a reminder that evidence does not expire. Truth does not disappear. And even when years pass without answers, the possibility of resolution remains. DNA doesn't forget, even when names are lost. Many viewers here follow these cases quietly. If this story mattered to you, you're not alone.